Welcome to Midnight Whispers, where the night doesn't whisper, it warns. As you lie in the safety of your bed, imagine footsteps in the forest, eyes watching from behind the trees, and truths too terrifying to ignore. These aren't just stories, they're echoes from the shadows, real accounts whispered under breath by those who survived. So close your eyes, but don't fall asleep too fast. The darkness remembers. Imagine finally achieving your dream of peace and quiet in a secluded mountain cabin, a sanctuary earned after decades of hard work. Now, imagine realizing you're not alone, and someone is watching your every move, planning something sinister. That chilling scenario became a terrifying reality for a retired lineman named Bill, deep in the heart of Tennessee. Bill, 58, had just hung up his climbing gear after 32 years of battling storms and power outages. He bought a little cabin near Rowan Mountain, 2 acres of pristine woodland, his nearest neighbor a half-mile down the road. It was him and Buster, his German Shepherd mix, a loyal companion he'd rescued a few months after moving in. Life was simple: coffee on the wraparound porch, watching the mist roll through the trees, a well-deserved tranquility. But that peace was about to shatter. It began on an unseasonably warm October night. Bill was unwinding in his recliner, the evening news murmuring in the background, when Buster stiffened. His ears shot up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Not aggressive, but a deep, primal warning. Bill muted the television, listening intently, but heard only the usual symphony of the mountains. Wind through pines, a distant owl. Buster, however, remained rigid, staring at the front door, his whole body tense. Bill dismissed it as a raccoon, flicked on the porch light, and saw nothing but the empty yard. Yet Buster wouldn't settle, pacing, whining softly. Around midnight, Bill heard it. Footsteps. Not the random crackle of leaves or a branch falling, but deliberate, measured steps, somewhere outside his bedroom window. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Someone was trying to be quiet, but failing. Bill lay there, his heart quickening, trying to rationalize it as a deer, a bear, anything but human. But the rhythm was wrong, too steady, too purposeful. Buster, now standing at the foot of the bed, his fur bristling, stared fixedly at the window. The footsteps circled the cabin, from the bedroom to the back, then stopped. An unnerving silence descended. After 20 minutes of agonizing stillness, Bill, armed with his trusty mag light, crept through the cabin, checking windows. The motion sensor light he'd installed should have triggered, but it was dark. Nothing. Until he reached the kitchen window. There, pressed into the tall grass along his property line, was a clear path, a 2-foot-wide track, running parallel to the cabin, about 30 yards out. It wasn't there that morning. It was too straight, too deliberate for animals. It was a human trail. The next morning, the path was even clearer, worn down in places, like someone had been walking this route regularly. Then he found them. Fresh cigarette butts, filtered, not the hand-rolled kind, and heel prints in the mud, size 10 or 11 work boots. The chilling realization hit him. Someone had been watching his cabin, learning his routines, planning something. How would you react if you found tangible evidence that your secluded haven was under surveillance? That night, every door and window was locked, a baseball bat by his bed. Buster was restless again. At 11 p.m., the footsteps returned, this time from the front of the cabin, louder, more confident. Across the gravel driveway, onto the creaking wooden steps of the porch, pausing at the front door, then circling around the side. The motion lights remained off. They'd been disabled. Bill had had enough. He grabbed his .38, chambered around, and stepped onto the porch. "I know you're out there. This is private property. Leave now." His voice echoed into the cool, moonlit air. No response. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sounds. He spent the rest of the night in his recliner, gun in his lap. Buster curled tight beside him, occasionally lifting his head to scan the windows. The next morning, Bill found the undeniable evidence that changed everything. At the far back corner of his property, where the cabin met the tree line, he saw them. 4 separate wire traps, strung between trees at ankle height, just 6 inches off the ground. Twisted tight, sharp, jagged metal ends, positioned perfectly to trip someone walking from his back door towards the woods. These weren't random snares, they were designed to cut and tangle, strategically placed for him. The thought that someone had studied his habits, watched him take Buster out back, and set these calculated traps, made him physically ill. Imagine discovering such calculated malice on your own property. How would you even begin to process that? Bill meticulously photographed the traps, then carefully cut them down. The metal was fresh. He also noticed smaller footprints nearby, size 7 or 8 boots. 2 people, or an attempt to confuse him? At the sheriff's office, Deputy Johnson initially dismissed Bill's story until he saw the photos of the wire traps. His attitude shifted instantly. "Never seen anything like this in 20 years, he admitted. "This level of premeditation usually means something much worse." He promised patrols, but Bill knew better. The stalker had escalated. Within a week, Bill had installed motion-activated cameras, new locks, and a floodlight system. He barely slept, watching, waiting. For 3 nights, silence. Then, on the 4th night, at 2 a.m., every floodlight around his cabin blazed to life. He grabbed his gun, expecting to see someone caught in the glare. Instead, he saw smashed cameras, every single one, systematically destroyed with what looked like a sledgehammer. But they'd missed one. A trail cam hidden 50 yards out. The footage showed a figure in dark clothing and a ski mask, methodically dismantling his security. They knew exactly where everything was. And in the final seconds before that camera was also destroyed, the figure looked directly into the lens and waved. That morning, Bill called Deputy Johnson and told him he was leaving. He packed essentials, arranged a rental in town. On his last night, he sat on the porch with Buster and his .38, waiting. Around midnight, the deliberate footsteps returned, stopping right at the edge of the porch, just 10 feet away. He couldn't see them, but he felt their presence. "I'm leaving," he called out into the darkness. "You win. You can have the place." The footsteps slowly retreated. He never heard them again. He sold the cabin 6 months later. As far as he knows, the new owners have had no problems. But Bill still wonders if the invisible watcher is out there, in those mountains, waiting for the next target to come along. This story revealed the chilling reality of deliberate human intent in the wilderness. But what happens when that threat targets not just a solitary individual, but a vulnerable family, turning a bonding trip into a fight for survival? A father-daughter camping trip, a chance to reconnect, a breath of fresh air in the Blue Ridge Mountains. What could possibly go wrong? A lot. When a seemingly lost hiker turns out to be something far more sinister, watching your every move, even as you sleep. That blissful anticipation of a bonding trip shattered into pure terror for a single dad named David and his 15-year-old daughter, Lily, turning their idyllic mountain escape into a desperate fight for survival. David, a mechanical engineer, had been raising Lily since she was 7. With their busy lives, this trip was their precious chance to reconnect, just the 2 of them, revisiting the trails they'd explored when she was a little girl. He remembered packing their old Coleman tent, patched from a marshmallow stick incident 3 years prior, and felt a surge of hope as Lily, for once, was genuinely excited, not buried in her phone. Their reserved campsite was 2 miles up the Appalachian Trail, a serene clearing bathed in sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees. The weather was perfect, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine. Lily, now keeping pace with him easily, chatted about school, and for the first time in months, David felt his little girl coming back, even as she insisted she wasn't little anymore. Around 6 p.m., as the sun began to dip behind the ridges, they were playing 20 questions on a fallen log, about 50 feet from their tent. Then, he simply appeared. 1 second, they were alone. The next, there he was, 30 yards away, walking towards them with a strange, uneven gait. He looked to be in his 40s, average height, draped in a faded green flannel shirt that was far too warm for the mild evening, and jeans caked in what looked like fresh mud despite days without rain. His hair was dark, greasy, hanging in clumps, his beard patchy and untrimmed, but it was his eyes that locked David's attention. Glassy, unfocused, as if he was looking through them, not at them. He carried a small, almost empty backpack. "Excuse me," he called out when he was 10 feet away, his voice scratchy. "I'm really sorry to bother you folks, but I'm wondering if you might have any water to spare." The request was innocent enough, but a cold knot formed in David's stomach. The way his eyes darted around their campsite, taking inventory, felt less like a plea and more like an assessment. Lily instinctively moved closer, her small frame tensing beside him. The man reeked of sweat, unwashed wool, and something else David couldn't quite place, damp earth perhaps, or something far older and more primal. His fingernails were caked with dirt, and red scratches marred his forearms, as if he'd been fighting his way through dense, thorny brush. "I've been hiking for... well, I'm not really sure how long," he mumbled, running a dirty hand through his hair. His movements jerky, uncoordinated. "I think I might have taken a wrong turn somewhere back there." He gestured vaguely into the trail behind him, but the gesture lacked conviction, as if he wasn't truly sure himself. The entire interaction felt surreal, as if they were speaking to a ghost or a man lost not just in the woods, but in his own mind. David, raised to help those in need, couldn't refuse. Denying water in the wilderness felt unconscionable. "Sure, no problem," he said, forcing a friendly tone, as he retrieved a partially full Nalgene bottle from their tent. Lily remained on the log, her gaze fixed on the stranger, her unease palpable. The man took the bottle with both hands, gulping it down with desperate, noisy swallows, water dribbling onto his grimy shirt. "Thank you so much," he rasped between gulps. "You have no idea how much this means to me." But as he drank, his eyes continued their systematic sweep of their campsite. The tent, the backpacks, the cooler. It wasn't curiosity. It was like he was memorizing their layout, cataloging their possessions. When he finished, he held the empty bottle for a moment too long, turning it in his hands as if considering keeping it. "Are you camping nearby?" David asked, attempting to sound casual, but his parental instincts were screaming. Lily, unusually quiet, watched the man like a prey animal. No, I'm just trying to get back to my car," he said, his voice trailing off. "I parked somewhere down the mountain, but everything looks different now. The trails, they're not where I remember them being." He handed David the bottle, his fingers icy cold despite the warm air. "You folks seem like you know what you're doing out here. Been camping long?" The question, seemingly innocent, felt loaded. David felt an urgent need to end the conversation. Lily, unusually quiet, remained silent, rigid on the log. "Just got here today," David answered, a deliberate lie. Planning to head out tomorrow morning. He wasn't sure why he'd withheld their true plans to stay another night, but an instinct, sharp and insistent, told him not to reveal their full schedule. The stranger nodded slowly, processing the information. "Tomorrow morning, that's good," he said, and a chilling inflection in his tone made David's skin crawl. "It's not safe to stay out here too long. People go missing in these mountains." He spoke the words casually, like a comment on the weather, yet they hung in the air, a chilling, undeniable threat. Lily's eyes widened, and she finally spoke, her voice a strained whisper. "Dad, we should probably start getting dinner ready." Smart girl, she was giving them an exit. The man's head snapped towards her voice, and for a fleeting second, his expression changed. The glassy, confused look vanished, replaced by something alert, predatory, and deeply calculating. "Pretty daughter you got there," he said, and the way he said it, the possessiveness in his tone, sent every alarm bell in David's head ringing. "She's got good instincts. You should listen to her." He shouldered his almost empty backpack and began to back away, his eyes never leaving them. "Thanks again for the water. Maybe I'll see you folks around." Then he turned and walked deeper into the forest, not back the way he'd come, but towards a network of smaller paths leading to more remote camping areas. David and Lily watched him disappear, and an overwhelming urge to pack up and flee seized David. But darkness was descending, and hiking down the mountain with Lily in the dark would be perilous. "Dad, that guy was really weird," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Did you see how he kept looking at our stuff and the way he stared at me? David had seen it, and it made him physically ill. Yeah, sweetheart. I noticed that too. He tried to reassure her, his voice projecting a confidence he didn't feel. But he's gone now, and we're going to be fine. Inside, he was already running through escape scenarios. Would you have offered him water, or would your instincts have screamed to run? David's instincts had screamed, but his conscience had overruled them. He wondered if that decision would cost them everything. They spent the rest of the evening trying to act normal, cooking dinner, talking about school, but every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made them jump. David kept glancing at the trail, half expecting the man to emerge from the shadows. He zipped the tent tight, positioned himself between Lily and the opening. His phone clutched uselessly in his hand. No signal. As they settled into their sleeping bags, he told Lily he loved her, that everything would be okay, but neither of them believed it. Around 2 a.m., David woke to footsteps circling their tent. Not animal, deliberate, human steps, moving slowly, carefully. His heart hammered. Lily slept beside him. The footsteps stopped right outside their tent, 3 feet from where they lay. He held his breath. Then, a metallic scraping sound. Something hard being dragged across rock. It moved in a slow arc around their tent. Someone was deliberately circling them, dragging a metal object, wanting them to know they were there. The scraping was rhythmic, purposeful. David fumbled for his phone. Still, no signal. The sounds continued for what felt like hours. Then silence, an even more terrifying void. He lay perfectly still, straining his ears, until eventually, exhaustion claimed him. He must have dozed off. The next thing he knew, sunlight filtered through the tent fabric, and Lily was shaking him awake. "Dad, there's something outside," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. He unzipped the tent flap. What he saw made his blood run cold. Deep gouges in the dirt, forming a perfect circle around their tent, like someone had used a crowbar. They were fresh, an inch deep, circling their entire campsite. Near the fire pit, muddy boot prints, the same ones he'd seen on the stranger's feet, crisscrossed their campsite, as if he'd been walking freely while they slept. Some prints were right next to their tent, close enough to touch the fabric. At least 20 different prints. He'd been out there for a long time, probably watching them sleep. The worst discovery. A makeshift lean-to, 50 yards into the woods, made from branches and leaves. It hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had been camping within sight of them, and they'd had no idea. They packed up in record time, barely speaking, Lily glancing fearfully at the lean-to. The hike down the mountain felt endless, every rustle, every sound, making them jump. Finally, they reached the parking area. Other people, a blessed sight. David sped away, both he and Lily processing the terror. An hour later, he stopped at a state police station in Millerville. Sergeant Williams listened, his expression growing grim as David described the man. He disappeared, returning with a file. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice grave, "I think you and your daughter encountered someone we've been looking for. 2 hikers, Kevin and Beth Turner, had been reported missing in that area since Saturday. Their abandoned campsite had been found 3 miles away, personal belongings gone, boot prints matching the strangers, signs of surveillance. The man had been spotted by other campers, always disoriented, always asking for help, always disappearing back into the forest. The crowbar scratches around their tent," Williams explained, "were likely his way of marking territory. David's report gave them enough to intensify the search. Within a week, the man was arrested, and tragically, evidence of what had happened to the missing hikers was found. David and Lily never went back to those mountains. To this day, Lily won't camp without cell phone service. David still wonders what would have happened if they'd stayed that second night. He's just grateful they made it home." David and Lily's terrifying ordeal revealed how quickly a serene wilderness can become a hunting ground when human malice is involved. But sometimes, the threat isn't a tangible person. What if the danger isn't walking into your camp, but lingering in the very fabric of the forest itself, echoing warnings from a dark history? Have you ever felt a presence in places that just felt off, as if they held a memory of terror? Some places carry the weight of what happened there. manifesting in ways that blur the line between psychological dread and the truly supernatural. Our first account tonight comes from a software engineer from Chicago, let's call him Alex, who embarked on a solo Appalachian Trail thru hike, seeking an escape from the corporate grind and a chance to find peace in nature. He'd been meticulously planning for months, training, researching, mapping out every shelter. This was supposed to be therapeutic, a test of self-reliance, a chance to prove his resilience. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, miles feeling effortless. He stopped in a small trail town for supplies and a hot meal at a classic diner. As he finished his coffee, an old man at the counter, with a face weathered by years, overheard Alex discussing his plans to stay at Whisper Ridge Shelter. The old man turned slowly, his eyes holding a profound seriousness, and issued a stark warning. "Whatever you do, don't sleep at Whisper Ridge Shelter tonight." His voice was low, urgent, like a secret shared unwillingly. When Alex pressed for details, the old man merely shook his head, muttering about bad things happening there, before retreating to his pie. The waitress, rolling her eyes, dismissed it as local superstition, assuring Alex the shelter was perfectly safe, just an old three-sided structure a couple of miles up the trail. But the intensity in the old man's eyes had unsettled Alex, twisting his stomach with a subtle unease. Yet, his route was planned. The next shelter was 8 miles further, and he was tired. He dismissed the warning as small-town folklore, a story to spook the city boy. The hike to Whisper Ridge was beautiful. Towering oak trees forming a natural cathedral, golden light filtering through the leaves. Alex felt at peace, dropping his pack in the standard shelter, setting up his gear as the sun painted the sky in oranges and purples. He cooked dinner, wrote in his journal, and watched the stars emerge. Around 9 p.m., he crawled into his sleeping bag, reading by headlamp, feeling more relaxed than he had in months. The gentle breeze, the dropping temperature, everything felt perfect, perhaps too perfect. He should have remembered the old man's warning wasn't about the shelter itself, but about what happens there after dark. The first whisper came around midnight. So faint, Alex almost convinced himself it was just the wind, his brain playing tricks in that liminal state between sleep and wakefulness. But then it came again, definitely human voices. Multiple people talking in hushed tones, somewhere just beyond the back wall of the shelter. The sound was muffled but unmistakably real, like a secretive conversation, a discussion not meant for his ears. His heart began to pound. He lay there, utterly still, straining to make out words, to gauge how many people were out there. The voices seemed to move slowly around the perimeter of the shelter, never getting closer, never truly fading. He tried to rationalize it, other hikers setting up late camp, but the hushed, secretive tone, the way his skin crawled, screamed that this wasn't normal. Every instinct told him to be terrified. He grabbed his headlamp, but dared not turn it on, holding it like a pathetic weapon in the darkness. The whispering continued for what felt like hours, sometimes almost gone, then returning, just loud enough to confirm its presence. At least 2 distinct voices, maybe 3, but he couldn't understand a single word, as if they spoke a foreign language, or were simply too far away for clarity. The strangest part was their illogical movement. Behind the shelter, one moment, left, then right, as if aimlessly wandering. He waited for footsteps, for branches breaking, leaves crunching, but there was nothing but those constant, eerie whispers. His rational mind struggled, but his body was gripped by primal fear. As the night wore on, the whispers grew more frequent, seeming to close in on the shelter walls. They were clearest when directly behind him, separated only by thin wooden planks. At one point, he swore he heard something like fingers gently tapping the wood, a light, rhythmic sound lasting maybe 30 seconds before stopping. He realized he was holding his breath, afraid his own exhalations might draw attention. The voices would fade for 10 or 15 minutes, offering a sliver of hope, only to return, always hushed, always secretive. He checked his watch 100 times, counting down to sunrise, praying for daylight to end this nightmare. The worst part was the unknown. Who or what was out there, circling him like a predator. Around 3 a.m., the whispers stopped completely. The silence was almost worse, a terrifying void. He lay there, every muscle tensed, his own heartbeat thrumming in his ears. Minutes, then an hour passed. Just as he started to relax, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the outside of the shelter. Not quiet steps, but heavy, purposeful, as if demanding to be heard. They circled once, twice, then stopped directly in front of the open entrance. Alex saw only darkness, but he knew someone stood there, watching him. After an eternity, the footsteps moved away, and gradually, the normal forest sounds returned. But Alex didn't sleep another minute, clutching his headlamp, watching the entrance. When the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, he'd never been so relieved. He packed up in record time, not even bothering with coffee or breakfast, desperate to get away. As he shouldered his pack, he took one last look around, swearing he could still feel eyes watching him from the dark woods. The peaceful forest now felt menacing, hostile, hiding secrets he didn't want to know. He practically ran down the trail. Back at the same diner, the waitress took one look at him and asked if he was okay. When he recounted the whispers and footsteps, her face paled. She fetched her father, the old man from the day before. He sat across from Alex, his weathered face grave, and told him what Alex should have heeded. 15 years ago, a hiker named Jake Mitchell had been murdered at that exact shelter, stabbed multiple times in his sleep. His killer never caught. Locals had reported strange sounds and voices there ever since, especially when solo hikers stayed. He looked Alex in the eye and said, "That's why we try to warn people. Some places just aren't meant for the living anymore." Alex never finished that hike, never returned to a remote trail. The rational part of him wants to believe it was imagination, pranks, or stress. But deep down, he knows what he heard was real, connected to Jake Mitchell. Was it his spirit trying to warn him, or something darker drawn to the violence? He'll never know. He still wakes, hearing whispers, reminding himself he's hundreds of miles from Whisper Ridge. So, what was it? Just some late-night hikers playing a cruel prank? Or was something else? Something older? Something darker? Echoing a warning from the past? Alex's experience at Whisper Ridge makes you wonder how many other places hold such chilling echoes. Our next account takes us to the Great Smoky Mountains, where a solo hiker, struggling with a recent breakup, sought solace and space to think. Mid-afternoon, thick clouds rolled in faster than expected. Within minutes, the trail darkened. Sideways rain began to fall, and thunder cracked so close it sounded like the mountain itself was splitting apart. She was on an old, printed map's quiet route, having seen no one all day. When lightning got close enough to make her pack buzz, drenched and panicking, she pulled out the map. A faint marking, almost faded in a crease, labeled emergency shelter. No signage, no mileage, just a dot in the woods. A 15 or 20-minute detour, maybe more in the mud, but she didn't care. She turned and ran, chasing a ghost. The trail was overgrown, narrow, clawing at her jacket, smelling of wet leaves and earth. After nearly slipping twice on slick rock, she saw it. A small, rectangular structure, half sunk into the hill, concrete walls, a rusted metal door with peeling paint, and one broken window patched with plywood. Abandoned, not exactly welcoming, but the storm was raging, and she was soaked. She pushed the unlocked door open and stepped inside. At first, it seemed empty. Concrete floor, a built-in bench, a shelf with an old first aid kit, a couple of folded wool blankets. The air was damp, smelling of mildew. But then she noticed unsettling details. An open granola bar wrapper, not soggy, as if recently eaten. A plastic bottle, half full of water, dust-free. And, tucked behind the bench, a shredded, bright red fleece jacket, one sleeve almost torn clean off. If this place hadn't been on maps for years, why did it look like someone had just been here? She stood there, dripping, eyes locked on that torn red sleeve. Not just ripped. It looked yanked or caught on something sharp. Faint smears of dirt, or perhaps something darker, stained the collar. A strange weight settled in her chest. She told herself someone had left in a hurry, a ranger, a lost hiker. But nothing felt normal. The trash, the clothes, the oppressive silence. It felt like she'd walked into a story she wasn't supposed to read. She tried to distract herself, setting up her emergency blanket in the driest corner, changing into spare clothes, pulling out a protein bar. No signal inside, but she checked her phone anyway. Nothing. Chewing, she listened to the rain hammering the roof, aware of every drip, every gust of wind slipping through cracks. The longer she sat in that concrete box, the more the sounds blended into a low, humming pressure behind her ears. She got up to explore the small, bare room, behind the shelf with the first aid kit. She noticed something faint on the wall. At first, she thought it was water damage or graffiti, but as she got closer, she saw words scratched into the concrete with something sharp. Not a full sentence, just one line. "If someone else comes, don't let them in." Her breath caught. She stepped back, reading it again, then a third time. The letters were rough, uneven, carved in a rush. It didn't feel like a joke, didn't even feel recent. The message was just enough out of sight, as if the writer didn't want it seen unless you were truly looking. And then she heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the metal door. Not pounding, but controlled, like someone knew exactly where they were and wanted her to know it too. She froze, watching the door. No repetition, no voice, no rattling handle, no shuffled footsteps, just those 3 knocks. Then silence. She stared at the seam between the door and frame, half expecting a shadow to shift. Nothing. Still, she couldn't move. Her heart thumping against her ribs, the walls feeling smaller. After a minute that felt like 10, she crawled across the floor, turned off her flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. She didn't even risk her phone screen, pressing her back to the wall, breathing as quietly as possible. She didn't know how much time passed. An hour, 3. She dozed off, but every creak or gust of wind snapped her awake. No more footsteps. No one tried the door, but the sense that someone or something was just standing out there never faded. When morning finally came, stiff, cold, barely thinking clearly, she grabbed her bag and left without looking back. The trail was easier in daylight. A few hours later, at a ranger station, she asked one of the staff about an emergency shelter past the ridge. The ranger paused, then shook his head. "Used to be one up there," he said, "but it got decommissioned more than 15 years ago. Roof was supposed to be unsafe. Place was sealed." "You're saying it's still standing?" She didn't know what to say, only that she'd found it by accident during the storm. She didn't mention the jacket, the food wrappers, the writing on the wall, and she definitely didn't mention the knocks. She never went back to that part of the park. She still hikes, but never alone, and never with old maps. Whatever happened in that shelter, whatever left that warning, she wasn't supposed to see it. But someone did. Someone was there. And for reasons she'll never understand, they didn't come in. These stories of lingering warnings make you wonder, are these simply pranks, or is something darker, something ancient, trying to communicate? But not all presences in the wilderness are malevolent. Or at least, not overtly so. What if a ghost led you to safety? Or an unseen figure merely observed from the shadows, leaving you with more questions than answers? We've explored places where the past echoes with clear warnings, where the very ground seems to remember dark deeds. But what if the figures in the shadows aren't just remnants of tragedy, but cryptic guides? Or something far more unsettling? Tonight, we delve into encounters where the line between help and haunting, between the natural and the truly inexplicable, blurs entirely. Take the story of a 16-year-old girl named Sarah who found herself lost on a winding trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. It was a family trip, meant for reconnection, but Sarah had wandered off the main path, sketching tree roots, when the fog rolled in, thick and disorienting. She called out for her parents, but only silence answered. Panic began to tighten its grip, every rustle of leaves sending a jolt through her. Then, a voice, calm and close. "Hey, are you lost?" A boy around her age stood a few feet off the trail, wearing a faded red hoodie. Something about him felt oddly familiar, like a face from a half-remembered dream. He introduced himself as Eli, and with a casual certainty that instantly eased her fear, he turned and started walking, expecting her to follow. She did. The path Eli led her down wasn't on any map she'd seen. It was quieter, older, with towering trees and ancient carvings in their bark. Eli touched one as they passed, saying, "That one's mine." When she asked what he meant, he just shrugged. He didn't offer many details, only that he used to come here often. After 20 minutes, the familiar parking lot appeared through the thinning fog, a beacon of relief. She turned to thank him, but he was already stepping back into the trees, giving a small wave before he vanished. Back at the ranger station, her parents were frantic. While her dad spoke to an older ranger, Sarah wandered to a faded bulletin board. And there, under a section titled "In Memory," was a photo that punched the air from her lungs. Eli Chambers. The same light brown hair, the same small scar on his chin. The caption read, "Died in 2011, slipped and fell near an overlook." The ranger, overhearing her, turned pale when she described Eli. He nodded slowly, almost knowingly, and said, "You're not the first one to say something like that." Sarah's parents dismissed it as stress, a mind playing tricks, but Sarah knew what she had seen. She knew who had helped her. Was Eli a guardian angel, a lingering spirit, or something else entirely? A benevolent echo in the mist? What do you think? Eli's story leaves us with the profound question of whether unseen forces can act as cryptic guides, blurring the lines between the living and whatever else exists in these ancient mountains. But not all ambiguous encounters offer such a clear, if unsettling, resolution. Sometimes, they leave you with nothing but a blank space in your memory and a chilling sense of what you don't remember. Consider the terrifying experience of a 17-year-old Alex on a senior camping trip to Copper Mountain. Alex, restless and adventurous, decided to hike alone to Crystal Lake before sunset. The initial trail was familiar, peaceful, but as they ascended, the atmosphere shifted. The path grew steeper, the forest denser, and an eerie silence fell. The usual sounds of wildlife vanished. Alex began to feel an intense, unsettling sensation of being watched. Their phone, which had full bars moments before, suddenly showed no service. Alone on the narrow, winding trail, the feeling grew stronger, like unseen eyes tracking every step. Stopping for a drink, the silence was so complete Alex could hear their own heartbeat. Then, a single snap of a branch behind them. No response to their hesitant calls. Pushing forward, Alex began a steep scramble up a rocky face. Mid-climb, they made the mistake of looking back. There, 50 yards down the trail, stood a figure, tall, human-shaped, and unnervingly still among the trees, partially obscured by branches. It was dark, unmoving, just watching. Alex called out, but there was no response, no acknowledgement. Pure panic took hold. Alex began scrambling back down, determined to confront the follower, to regain control. But as they reached the spot where the figure had been, there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no sign that anyone had ever stood there. The panic became terror. Alex turned and ran, phone clutched tight, desperately seeking a signal. Every shadow became a threat. They remembered reaching a familiar lightning-struck oak, a sign of safety. And then, nothing. The next thing Alex knew, they were waking up in a hospital bed, their best friend Jessica by their side, tears streaming down her face. Alex had no memory of how they got there, no recollection of the hours after that oak tree, only the chilling, profound blankness. What happened in those missing hours between the lightning-struck oak and the hospital bed? Was it a medical event brought on by fear and exertion? Or was that unmoving figure more than just a trick of the light? What are your theories on what truly transpired on Copper Mountain? From cryptic guides to inexplicable blackouts, the mountains continue to hold secrets that defy logic. These experiences shatter our understanding of reality, leaving us with lingering questions and a profound sense of the unknown. But what about sounds that come from nowhere, with no explanation, yet are so profoundly real that they haunt you forever? Imagine hearing agonizing screams from a place no one can reach, cries that defy explanation, echoing from the depths of a mountain that refuses to give up its secrets, haunting you for years to come. This final story begins high on Mount Harrington, a massive peak 3 hours north of our hometown in Vermont. My brother Tyler, 24 and fresh out of college, and I, 26, working a dead-end warehouse job. Both desperately needed an escape from the mundane routines that had swallowed our lives. It was last August, and we planned a simple 2-day, 1-night camping trip, seeking enough distance from civilization to just forget. The weather on that Saturday morning was perfect. Clear skies, mid-72nd, barely a breeze. We'd spent weeks poring over maps, reading reviews, anticipating the challenge. Mount Harrington wasn't for beginners, but we'd tackled plenty of tough trails. Tyler was always the fire, the one pushing us further, off the beaten path. I was the anchor, the voice of caution, ensuring we had water, minimizing risks. We were a perfect balance, or so I thought. By noon, the trailhead was almost empty. Perfect, Tyler grinned, shouldering his pack. Just the way we like it. The first few hours were exactly what we hoped for. We followed the main trail through dense pine forest, pausing to check the map and marvel at the sprawling views. Tyler, in a talkative mood, chatted about a girl from a coffee shop, his plans to finally move out. I half listened, focused on the steady rhythm of my boots and the sun filtering through the canopy. Around 3 p.m., we reached Eagle's Rest, a flat clearing halfway to the summit. We took a longer break, sharing trail mix, planning the final push. That's when Tyler saw it, something not on our map. 50 yards east, barely visible through the trees, was a narrow ledge jutting from the cliff face. Tyler's eyes lit up, that familiar spark of discovery. He pointed, already on his feet, adjusting his pack. "Come on," he urged. "Let's check it out before we head to the campsite." I hesitated, glancing at my watch. Thick clouds were starting to gather, and mountain weather changes fast. I never liked wandering off marked trails this late. But Tyler was already moving, and I knew arguing was futile. "Fine," I conceded, grabbing my pack. "Quick look, though. We're not spending the night up there." Getting to the ledge was much harder than it looked. We pushed through thick underbrush, scrambled over fallen logs, following what might have been an old animal trail. Tyler, as always, led the way, clearing branches, calling out warnings about loose rocks. The forest seemed to close in around us, the canopy thicker, the air cooler, carrying an unusual stillness. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, we finally emerged onto the ledge. It was larger than I expected, maybe 15 feet wide and 30 feet long, with a terrifying sheer drop-off on one side that plunged at least 200 feet. The view was absolutely breathtaking, stretching for miles across the valley, the river a silver ribbon winding through the forest below. Tyler immediately went to the edge, peering down into the depths. I stayed back, never comfortable with such heights. The ledge itself was covered in loose gravel, scattered with what looked like old, rusted tent stakes, frayed rope, and the remains of a fire pit someone had built against the back wall. Tyler kicked at the ashes, which looked recent enough to still have unburned wood fragments. "Somebody's been here recently," he said, crouching to examine the setup. I didn't like that idea. The whole area felt abandoned, as if people had left in a hurry. The wind, whistling through the rocks behind us, created these low, hollow sounds that seemed to echo from deep within the cliff. Tyler, oblivious, was already planning our tent setup on the flat section, talking about how amazing the sunrise would be. I kept checking my watch as the sun sank lower, the clouds growing thicker, the temperature dropping. We needed to get back to the main trail, find our designated campsite before it got too dark. But Tyler was in full exploration mode, poking around the back of the ledge where the cliff wall curved inward, forming a shallow alcove. He found some kind of opening, a narrow crack in the rock that seemed to go deeper than expected. "Hey, check this out," he called, pulling out his phone's flashlight. "I think this might be a cave or something." I walked over reluctantly. Cave exploring without proper equipment was not on my agenda. The opening was barely wide enough to squeeze through, and Tyler's phone beam disappeared into complete darkness after only a few feet. The wind picked up, and I swear the sound from that crack changed. Instead of hollow whistling, it became something lower, more sustained, almost like moaning. Tyler must have heard it too, because he stepped back, his phone light wavering. Probably just the wind hitting the rock at a weird angle, he said. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. I suggested we head back, but he wanted to investigate a little longer. The sun was dangerously low, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift, making my skin crawl. That's when we both heard it clearly for the first time. A sound that was definitely not wind. Muffled and distant, but unmistakably human. Someone was screaming. Down there, in the darkness below the cliff. We both rushed to the edge. Tyler shone his phone light into the void while I cupped my hands and shouted, "Hello! Can you hear us? Are you hurt?" The screaming stopped immediately, as if someone had hit a mute button. We waited in complete silence, straining our ears for any response. Then it started again, but this time it sounded different. More desperate, more frantic. There were definitely multiple voices, maybe 3 or 4, all crying out at once. The sound seemed to come from directly below us, but Tyler's light couldn't penetrate far enough. I added my phone's beam, but even combined, we saw nothing. The screaming continued in waves, sometimes loud enough that I was sure hikers miles away could hear it, sometimes fading to barely audible whispers. Tyler immediately dialed 911, but of course, we had no cell service up there. We were too far, too surrounded by rock and forest. I tried my phone too, moving around the ledge, desperate for even one bar. But nothing. The screaming grew more intense, taking on an almost rhythmic quality that sent chills down my spine. It didn't sound like people calling for help anymore. It sounded like something else entirely. Tyler was already packing, his face pale in the fading light. "We need to get back to the trail and find a ranger station," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "These people have been stuck down there for who knows how long." We hiked back through the forest faster than we'd ever moved, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, the screaming continued until we were too far away to hear it. We practically ran down the main trail, our headlamps cutting through the growing darkness. Tyler kept checking his phone, desperate for a signal. Finally, about a mile from the trailhead, we got 2 bars. He immediately called 911 while I pulled out the map, trying to give the dispatcher our exact location. The conversation felt surreal, explaining that we'd heard multiple people screaming from below a cliff, that we couldn't see them but they sounded trapped, that we needed search and rescue immediately. The dispatcher was professional but clearly skeptical, asking us to repeat details, confirming we hadn't actually seen anyone. We gave them the coordinates as best we could, describing the off-trail ledge and approximate location. They promised to send teams at first light, explaining that night rescue operations in that terrain were extremely dangerous. We spent that night in Tyler's car at the trailhead, neither of us able to sleep. Tyler kept talking about how we should have tried to rappel down, that we'd abandoned people counting on us. I replayed the sounds, trying to convince myself it was human voices and not some weird acoustic phenomenon. Around dawn, we watched 3 search and rescue vehicles arrive, followed by a helicopter that circled for hours. The ground team spent the entire day combing every inch of the cliff face below that ledge, using ropes and specialized equipment to access impossible areas. Late that afternoon, a ranger approached our car with a grim expression. They'd found nothing. No people, no bodies, no evidence that anyone had ever been trapped down there. But then he said something that made my stomach turn. "You're not the first ones to report screaming from that exact spot," he told us quietly. "Happens about once a year. Always around dusk. Always the same description. We've never found anything, but we keep looking because, well, what else can you do?" Tyler and I drove home in complete silence. Neither of us has been hiking since. Sometimes, I still wake up hearing those voices, wondering if we really did abandon someone that night, or if we stumbled onto something much worse than a simple rescue situation. This story, like so many others we've explored, reminds us that the wilderness holds secrets that defy logic, places where the veil between the known and the utterly inexplicable is thin. From an invisible watcher in a secluded cabin, to the sinister presence haunting a family camping trip, to the chilling whispers in an old trail shelter, and the ambiguous guides leading you back from the brink, the mountains keep their mysteries close. What happened on Mount Harrington? Was it human, animal, or something else entirely? A lingering echo of a past tragedy, or a phenomenon rooted in something far more ancient and unknowable? We may never have the answers, but the questions themselves reshape how we view the wild, untamed places of our world. Have you ever experienced something in nature that simply couldn't be explained? A sound, a presence, an event that left you with more questions than answers? Share your own unexplained wilderness experiences or theories in the comments below. Because as we've seen tonight, sometimes what truly lurks beyond the trail isn't just a physical danger, but a profound, unsettling mystery that stays with you long after you've left the woods.